Welcome, 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 everybody. Thank you again to Christoph Brun for the excellent Left Reckoning music. Stoked to be here. Let's hang out a little bit. These going to be a little bit more of a casual stream than normal. We've been having a lot of guests on the Griscom streams, which I really appreciate. But sometimes it's nice to sort of sit back and chat with all of y'all. So feel free to throw some questions in there, and we can, jump in a little conversation. Um, I see the first question we have here from Candified, Zuck versus Musk, who wins? I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? Um, not that I'm a huge Mark Zuckerberg fan, but I'm sorry, that boy's going to destroy Elon Musk. If you've seen that dude is not in very good physical condition right now. Very funny too. I think people might have saw that friend of the show, Andrew Tate, has said that he would help train Elon Musk as well. Just like it's really beautiful in a way. All of the freaks and the nastiest people in on the globe right now are all becoming good buddies. But of course, what would be really funny with Andrew Tate would be he would probably be having to do those trainings over the internet. Um, and yeah, anyway, let's get going. So we got some questions in here. I want to give you all an update in a minute about Ken Paxton and um, his impeachment trial, and maybe we can talk a little bit of some theory, talk about the party. But let's start with questions and see where that takes us. Our good friend, congressional baseball fan, has a question for me. Um, Thoughts on findings in some finding the Titanic sub thing darkly humorous? You know, for me, I will say, and I said this on Tuesday, I'm not going to be the first one to do gallows humor on this kind of thing. I think it's a very sad thing. At the same time, I think that the argument being made that it's pretty impressive how quickly the state and governments all around the world are able to coordinate in a rescue operation like this. When people are regularly drowning in the Mediterranean, trying to enter into Europe, right? And I think that like making those points is extremely valid. I think it's also very valid to remember that these are people with more money than they should have. But I also think it's crucial to remember that the reason the rest of us, you know, the ruling class, like the reason that the rest of us are poor is because the ruling class makes us poor because they take from us. And that's a systemic thing, right? That's you can replace these folks. These people will be replaced. People will inherit their wealth, and that system won't change. So, look, I'm not somebody who's going to shed a bunch of tears over this or even get worked up at people participating in you know, joking around or having fun with the story. But for me, I don't find it to be something that really moves the ball forward in terms of building up, class politics or any kind of victory. I mean, some people I think have gone too worked up saying that like, oh well, all these folks celebrating this and joking about this is the reason the left will never win. No, I don't think that's true. But I also don't think that being sort of performative in your ability to sort of separate people um from being able to not like have basic kind of sympathy for somebody likely being crushed to death deep under the ocean, somehow makes you a stronger or more radical um member of the left. And I think most of that kind of discussion is sort of superficial in my opinion. But Jason wants to ask, when can we expect to see you on Timcast? It's not going to happen. Sorry, just zero interest in doing that conversation. And I know Emma's going to do it. I will be watching. It'll be interesting to see. The second question is, when will Emma get Tim to address his Thanos moment? I mean, I'm hoping that Emma's going to bring Thanos up with him. It seems to be about the only thing that he understands. Um, All right, let's see. Well, look, if people have questions, I can answer them. Why don't y'all get some more questions up in there? And I'm down to sort of talk about anything that's sort of on folks' minds. I know, Sri Thanadar. I don't know if people know who that is. He is a congressman out of Michigan who regularly touts and tries to promote himself as a democratic socialist. And which is ridiculous. I think he has paid his money to maybe be a member of the organization, but in no kind of real structural way as a representative of socialist politics or the organization itself. Um, he's going to be the one walking Modi uh, into Congress. He is going to be escorting him into the United States Congress. Modi, of course, for people who are unfamiliar, Prime Minister of India, has participated in some of the most blatant and horrific human rights abuses of Muslims in recent memory. We talk a lot about, people talk a lot about the worry of fascism. I mean, what they've been building with the BJP in India really, truly um, has some dark origins and some really, really dark potentials. I don't think anyone who outlines himself as a progressive, let alone a democratic socialist, should want to have anything to do with him. And I think it would be a good idea for the organization to officially rebuke and expel him as a member. Unbelievable stuff there. Um, Strom has a follow up here. He says this sort of thing, um, taking delight in this human suffering is disgusting and absolutely will scare off the normies. This is misanthropic, sadistic bile is Marxism. Well, I don't think that the kind of internet culture celebration of these things is Marxism. I don't think that this is going to cause any wins or losses one way or the other, Strom. I think that you can be upset about it. But look, I'm not somebody who jumps in on these things. I find the idea of people being trapped in that way, going out in that way, to be a really horrific thing, and that's how I think. I'm not one of these people who's going to jump into the fun and games on that. Even though I'm sorry to be a buzzkill, I just don't find it to be very appealing. I don't think that is good for us being able to develop the kind of empathy that we do need. But no, I'm sorry. I think that we can also hold these things in perspective while also saying all these people who think like this is class war, right? Celebrating something like this, celebrating a tragedy like this, that's wrong. But I also don't think that going around saying like this is the problem with the lesser, this is what's going to cause us to lose. I think that that is not accurate either. Back onto the Modi thing, and appreciate hearing from you, Strom, as always, though. Glass Shank says, "Do you think the Congress people Modi protest will have any effect?" Look, I think it's good that they're not showing up. I think that it's good that a lot of the DSA contingent people like AOC are not going to participate in this speech. Are not going to be present for it. I really think that people oftentimes ignore what's been going on in India, don't recognize how dangerous it already is, and how much more dangerous it can get in the near future. Modi is a far right Hindu nationalist. That's just something that is the complete opposite of anyone who consider themselves to be a progressive, let alone a democratic socialist. Won't have an effect. I mean, look, I think the people who pay attention to this thing catch that. I think the vast majority of the public, has very little interest in this. Maybe AOC and some of those people, because of their large platform and a lot of people who really respect their opinion, will continue to help grow some more awareness as to what's going on in India and the danger of Modi. But I think it will be limited. I think it's a good thing that they aren't participating, though. I think it's also been very telling that some of the, I don't know, peculiar critics of the left, who have sort of, present themselves as the true anti-imperialists, were attacking AOC and Ilhan Omar and the rest of them for not attending this speech. Samira Khan, I don't know if you guys know who she is. And I don't even want to bring her up because she really is just like a social media character. But she went on this bizarre tirade today about AOC, being a fake anti-imperialist and should have actually showed up to this thing, which I found to be quite ludicrous, and also shows that a lot of those critiques have very little to do with anything of substance, and almost everything to do with just sort of um, you know, being an eccentric, I guess. Ethan asks if I've seen the course decision today on the Jones case. I haven't. I've been working on a Jackman piece all afternoon, so I haven't really been keeping up with stuff that's been going on today. Um, our good friend Kowalski says, Dave, is Texas prepared for the upcoming hurricane season? The Gulf being as hot as mercury has me concerned about superstorms getting generated. I mean, no, they're not prepared. Um, our infrastructure and our emergency responses have been very, very bad in this state. I think you're right to be worried. Hell, we're seeing significant portions of East Texas are still without power from just a pretty bad summer storm. Um, you know, I hope to God that these systems don't get tested again this year. But no, we have not been developing our capacity to be able to respond to these things in a way that's really worrying. And I think this is fair. A congressional baseball fan says maybe Musk and Zuck should do a cage match inside of a submarine. That'd be interesting. And I agree with you on this completely, Strom. Going back to the sub story, Strom says, I wish they would have lived and had all of their wealth taken from them by dictatorships of the proletariat in 10 or 15 years. I think that is a much better outcome than all of this, for sure. Rory says, I'm so happy you brought up Mark Fisher and revolutionary optimism yesterday. I'd been listening to capitalist realism and I was like, damn, Mark Fisher, we need some hope. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I hope that the commentary from this week's main show hit folks. And for people who didn't catch that, I was talking about how we have to, do this. I'm finding the left, to Strom's point, I'm finding that like the things that are more popular on the left because are these more misanthropic tendencies, right? And I think a lot of that comes out of a feeling of pessimism and weakness. I mean, look, even going back to the sub thing, I'm not trying to make a big deal about this, but it seems it's on everybody's mind. Um, you know, acting like some kind of act of God like this, right? Or even something that's like, oh, the consequences of their stupidity, right? As I said on the show on Tuesday, I mean, like these guys got to stop trusting each other. That submarine should not have been in the water in the first place. I mean, it was ridiculous. And it really is emblematic of the grift and graft of a lot of these innovators and the titans of industry in American capitalism today, right? I mean, literally everyone's, saw they're piloting that machine with a Logitech controller. Pieces on the on the submarine were literally just pulled off of the shelf from Campers World. They got to stop trusting each other with this stuff. It doesn't work. Starlink failing, the rest of it. But look, this is not like something that we did, right? You know what I mean? It's not something that comes out of some sustained like class power. And I think, celebrating things like this in the way that people do as if they are like sort of victories in some way. I mean, I think that really betrays kind of sense of powerlessness, where you are like it's like when the televangelists celebrate storms hitting certain parts of the country, saying, oh, this is what happens when you become godless, right? I mean, it's a complete abstraction, right? It's not like a reflection of any power or mobilization or anything. It's an accident, right? And from this to some of the other more misanthropic philosophies like degrowth, that have been sort of growing in popularity, which sort of look at your neighbors and your community as the enemy. These are bad tendencies that I think have unfortunately been growing in popularity on the left. And I think that we have to be able to hold on to like the idea that a better world is possible because the capitalist class is really relying on demobilization and depression within the working class movement. That's what keeps them in power. And I think we need to be doing as much as we can within our own movements and within ourselves to push back against those tendencies. And I understand why people are like blue and upset. Like hell, I am all the time. you know I mean, things are rough. We don't have what we need right now to be able to change this country and the globe for the better. Here in Texas, literally, our governor and the GOP controlled legislature just effectively banned local politics, right? Which was like one of the few silver linings in Texas, was that we were starting to build up stronger and stronger progressive movements that were able to get certain levels of victory, right? Not building socialism or anything like that, but basic things, fighting for paid sick leave, water breaks for construction workers, etc. That being foreclosed, I mean, that's really, really depressing. But also being able to take the long view, then okay, well, maybe this means that we have to get a little bit more militant and radical in our struggle, taking on the power of capital directly rather than utilizing intermediary bodies like local government might be something that's necessary, right? It might mean that there needs to be much more commitment, for example, in supporting the Teamsters in their fight for air conditioning in their trucks. Um, and talking about, people always love to talk about, for example, how like the left shouldn't be so focused on electoral politics, and hell, I agree. But oftentimes I'm very, it's not really clear what other avenues people are talking about, because they are just as disconnected from the labor movement as a lot of other folks. Oftentimes more so disconnected from the labor movement than people who spend a lot of time working on local and state level campaigns all across the country. um, Maybe something like this will open up those doors and not, at least sort of speed up the commitment that, like, okay, if we can't, maybe for a period, things might be sort of cut off for us, at least in our ability to sort of write progressive pro worker legislation on the local level. Well, that might mean that you have to take the fight directly to capital, right, and win those things as concessions from the bosses, right? So if the state's not going to have mandated water breaks, win that in the contract, right? Build up the union rates in this state. These are all ways that you can respond to bad news, is what I'm saying. Like, you can respond to bad news, like what happened here in Texas, and say like, oh, this is the victory of the far right. They're taking away our rights, and fall into despair. Or you can say, okay, this avenue is sort of closed right now. What are other ways that we can fight back, right? And being able to get back on your feet once you've been hit. The left has been bad about that. Bernie Sanders loses, in the primary in 2020, and I mean, really, for a long time, things have been um, bleak on the left, I think, because we got hit really hard. We bet a lot on left populism. And left populism did a lot of good things. It mobilized a lot of people. It created a lot of doors. It opened up a lot of doors for left socialist politics in this country. But we're seeing where that vehicle took us, and we need to be thinking about ways to build something else. And like, you just have to have that, that fighting mentality, right? It's like, you get hit, you get right back up. And it's easy to fall into despair, and also they would prefer that if that's the case. Comrade Schultze says, what is the temperature there today? I remember that today on Black Bear News, today, as Kevin, the host, was covering the extreme temperature in West Texas today on his climate alarmist channel. I mean, it's rough. I mean, this is, we're going through a massive heat wave in Texas. Unfortunately, a lineman died on Monday from heat exhaustion. I believe a UPS worker also died in Dallas from working in the heat. And it's like, sometimes people get really glib about this thing. It's like, oh, it's Texas, it's hot. Well, yeah, it is hot in Texas. It's usually not this hot in June. Um, these are some of the hottest temperatures we've had this time of year in a century. And in a lot of other places, particularly in West Texas, they're breaking records, all-time records. So the heat's bad, right? And we're going through a climate crisis, and we have to be able to adapt and build movements that can keep people safe. Because the thing that's so sickening to me about heat related deaths is that these things are very preventable, with certain levels of safety measures, when you're not trying to overexert your employees, so that you can profit more. As I talk about, I used to work in concrete in the summer, pouring concrete. It's really dangerous when it's hot like that, especially when it's really humid and muggy. You're sweating a lot. If you don't have access to water, more importantly, if you don't allow your body the time to cool down, right? Being in the shade, let your body cool down from time to time. I mean, your body literally starts killing itself. And that's, what happened. I mean, this lineman in East Texas, who I believe was, working for, it was a West Virginian whose company got brought in to sort of help restore power for all the Texans who lost power during this most recent heat wave and really brutal thunderstorms. I mean, he passed away that night in his sleep. These are really dangerous and can be kind of silent killers, and that's why you actually have to have systematic protections for workers. To make sure that these things don't happen, because it doesn't matter how young, tough, and strong you are. Heat does not discriminate. And I agree with Rob here too. Rob says it is, of course, correct that the actual gloating is wrong. Um, Talking about the submarine again, but the contrast in the treatment of that vessel and the indifference for the refugees who regularly drown is starkly apparent. I mean, I think it's absolutely true, right? As we saw more horrific stories just today and the other day about deaths in the Mediterranean. Absolutely. I think that, like, well, the point is, like, if you want to talk about this thing to sort of agitate and to make points, that's the way to lead. I think it's undeniable that these guys um are getting treated very, very differently than the many, many migrants who perish trying to improve their lives. Okay, let's see. I'm a little bit behind you on questions. Somebody asked something about party, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So I'm going to make sure I see if I can catch up a little bit. Major wants to know, would you guys ever do a show on Stalin, his legacy, and how socials should think about that legacy when talking to other folks? I think that'd be a good idea. I think that that'd be something that I'd want to do right. So it might be something we cook up for a little while, but that's definitely been something I've been thinking about for a while. I prefer to do a really in-depth thing on Lenin first, because I think that in terms of like lessons, that's one that can really, um, get into. And I think we can get a lot out of. LM says Teresa Taylor from the Butthole Surfers died this week. Texas band, Austin. Yeah. You into the Surfers? Yeah. I mean, the Butthole Surfers were, a lot of fun. I mean, it's sad news. Teresa's also in, oh Lord, fuck. The Linklater. What's the Linklater film I'm thinking of? Anyway, no, rest in peace. I mean, it's truly sad. Okay, I'm gonna get to this party question. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything big else in the chat, because I think this gets into my friend Dell. Just solidarity with you. Dell says I'm in Texas on the coast, and the heat and humidity is horrible. I mean, it's bad. I mean, even just me doing some work around the house. It's rough. I'm not saying, and Osmosis 84 says, "Man, I can barely keep my family fed, keep gas in the car, and there's no help coming. But I'm supposed to shed a tear for these rich assholes stuck in the sub. But I'm not telling you to feel any which way or another about it, frankly." Okay, let's get into this question here from LP Paisa de Los Angeles. Do you think a progressive caucus within the Democratic Party hinders or helps a truly left party from developing in the U.S.? Well, I mean, if you're talking about the progressive caucus, I don't think that does anything for building working class power. I mean, we talk about Jai Paul and these figures a lot on this program. I think that the progressives have sort of shown themselves to not be as militant and even trying to build certainly not like a workers or a socialist movement in this country, but even something that is a little bit more antagonistic to the corporate control of the Democratic Party, right? They get in line all the time, right? They make some points every once in a while. They'll make some votes every once in a while that are positive, but no, I don't see much coming out of that formation, particularly how big it is at this point. Um, I don't find the Progressive Caucus to sort of open up doors. Now, if we're talking about maybe like a selection within the Democratic Party that maybe is pushing for some more radical politics, does that open up some doors? I mean, I think that you'd have to say, it depends. The idea, for example, with congressional members who are, for example, associated with the Democratic Socialists of America, was always to build up an electoral base and a elected official base, so that eventually, for example, you get to such a critical mass that you can walk from the Democratic Party, have a viable group of not just candidates but like already elected officials to have a power base in the party. Um, and then that can sort of build out some kind of third workers party or something like that. I think, as we've talked about with some of our friends in Canada, in the US, just because of how our electoral system is, we sometimes mistake the existence of like third parties in other countries for something that is more representative of maybe like a workers party, or sorry, a workers movement. And like you're not going to get the party before you have the movement. And I know that this is the thing that I think pisses off some people, but I think it's really important to outline why we talk about this. So maybe let me talk a little bit about the party. I'll keep the chat open. I'll come back to talk about questions on other things, but let's talk about parties for a second, um, and what this means for like social strategy going forward. Because this is something I've thought about a lot and been trying to talk about a lot on this program. Is like, what is a workers' party? Why do socialists even talk about the party so much in the first place? What is a party? So we talked about this a little bit during the post game for patrons last Tuesday, and I said I'd talk about it more today. So first of all, like when we're talking about a party, I think it's really important to recognize that a party is something that is like fundamentally distinct, in the socialist context, fundamentally distinct than the way a lot of Americans think of parties. A party in like the American context, frankly, right now it's just two major, private organizations that control ballot access in the United States of America. These being the Republican and the Democratic Party, they control the ballot. Right. There's some places that have pushed reforms, places like that don't have, for example, partisan elections. But for the most part, all across this country, particularly on the state level, um, most states in this country, the Republican and the Democratic Party virtually control access to the ballot. Now, you can petition, you can get enough signatures to get on the ballot, a third party like the Green Party does, but it takes a tremendous amount of manpower and effort to be able to do that in the first place. Time that's not being spent, cultivating candidates, building up organizations, etc. Right? You're spending most of your time trying to get enough signatures so that you can get onto the ballot. Um, so that's like the American context of a party, right? But like a socialist party is something that's very, very different. And I think one of the easiest ways to explain it, one of the simplest ways to explain it, is in the same way that you think about the union as the organization of the working class at the shop floor, right? And ideally, we might have a union system that's different than the one we have in the United States. In the United States, unions are balkanized, right? They have certain sections of a worker base, and even in the same institution, in the same facility. In other countries, they have things that are more broad based, more class based unions, instead of sort of having them being only represent one section of workers in one particular industry, etc. But anyways, if you can understand that the union is an organization that, yes, it does contract negotiations, but it also organizes those workers. It reflects their interest in endorsing candidates. It can mobilize them to do things like strike for their needs, or also do things like in solidarity with other unions and other parts of the working class, right? So a solidarity strike, sorry, giving financial support from one union to another when they're in hard times or going through a strike, right? This is an organization of class power, right? Um, and there's better versions of it than others, but like fundamentally that's what it is. What a party is the organization of the, what a socialist party would be, is the organization of the working class at the level of society, at the level of politics. So a way to think about this practically is if you had like a workers party, and like frankly it doesn't, like when people hear the word party, they almost exclusively think at the level of ballot access and running candidates, and that's certainly a part of it, but it's is not the entirety of it. And this is where these things become very, very different, from like the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, because an organization of the working class on like a social level, on a political level, can operate in all sorts of ways, right? It can operate practically in the sense of saying, we're going to support workers who go on strike, right? We're going to put manpower into this. We're going to put money into this. We're going to show support for this kind of thing, right? It has that organization and that base to be able to deliver literally bodies, like physically, like we can do this kind of thing if we organize and push ourselves to do it, like showing up at a picket line. It coalesces funds so that you could support um candidates, or more importantly workers, for example, if they're going on strike or need things for like a mutual aid or something like that. And lastly, it allows you to be able to make threats and follow through on them, right? So, like, one of the big fights right now that we're having in the United States is this fight about, should we vote third party or should we vote Democratic Party? And one of the reason that I get really annoyed with that conversation is not that I think that it's unimportant to think about which way people are voting, but we're talking about it as if we have some kind of orchestrated left. If you had, for example, 10% of the voting population, right? So not enough to win a presidential election. But enough that that's a sizable portion of the population, and people are committed to sort of acting in unison. So if that socialist party said, oh, you know what, they're like, the classic liberal argument is like, hold your nose and vote for the lesser of two evils, right? It doesn't even become a real question to me until you actually have the capacity to say, we will deliver this many people to you, um, as voters, for example, either for or against, right? So either, yes, we'll vote for, the lesser of two evils in this circumstance, but we want this or that, or no, we're not going to participate in this. So we're going to withhold our votes, vote third party, or not vote at all. That becomes, for example, 10% of the electorate. That swings elections. That gives you leverage and power. Um, these people talk about the after effect, right? Oh, well, I'm not going to vote for this person because it's going to mean this, or I'm going to vote for this person because it's going to mean that. And all these things we're talking about as an individual level. And the point of left politics, of socialist politics, is that we have people, we have a message, we have an idea, and we have aspirations that benefit the vast majority of people in this country. Something very different than the Democratic or the Republican Party, right? Which are fractured, largely act in the interest of capital and capitalists. Um, so the one of the fundamental things that we need to be able to do is to be able to develop organizations that can actually coordinate the large mass of people into acting in unison, instead of what we have now, where there's just a bunch of disparate people making arguments, trying to convince you to do this or trying to convince you to do that, right? That's not a mass organization. It also allows you to do things like build up capacity within the working class movement. I'm a radical, I'm a socialist. I believe that everyday people should be able to run their own lives and should be able to organize society. I'm forgetting um, who this quote is by. British Marxist radical, Lord forgive me. But like, to believe in the radical idea that like a baker can be the leader of society, right? Like the idea that like working class people have the capability to govern themselves. But to be able to do that practically, you need to be building up. So I believe that people have that capability, but we have to build up people's capacity, right? Just like on any job that you do, you have to be trained in how to do it, right? To understand the work that you're doing, understand the systems in place, understand the technology that you're utilizing, understand where things can go right, where things can go wrong. You need to be able to build up the capacity, because like, let's just say, magic wand thing, we wake up tomorrow and we are running the central bank, right? Now, obviously, in the inclinations and the desires of the people running that central bank, being workers, would be to help out working people. But do we have the knowledge, for example, that would be necessary to be able to operate a system like that? I don't, right? So we also have to, like, one of really important aspect of party building is this education, exploration, and capacity building within our own movement, so that we are prepared to take over these kinds of systems if we are put in charge of them, right? Um, so like the party structure does so much more, for example, than just building um, than just running candidates for office and then winning some elections. It's actually like a training program for governing. Um, This is something that Fred Hampton talks about a lot. I did a video for Jacobin a while ago called like political theory, political theory is for everybody. Um, and one of the things that I was talking about in that was like how Fred Hampton, radical leader of the Black Panthers in Chicago, um, there's a video we played in that of him getting a proposal from the Black Panthers to start create a public bank, to create a community bank. And he is very angry when he gets this proposal because there is no political education aspect to it, right? There is no public outreach, internal outreach within it to say to the membership of the Black Panthers, for example, this is what a community bank does. This is why it's important. This is how it functions, so that you understand what you're doing and not just doing what you were told. And he talks about how this is important because, why do you have a community bank in the first place? Well, the financial system has largely cut out Black people from being able to get finance or loans to be able to purchase things in their community, which means that they're underinvested in, which means that they don't have the capacity to buy a house, to buy a car, to buy furniture. And if they are able to get access to this funding, it usually means that they're going to be paying usury interest rates on that and be taking advantage. So taking that power away from finance, delivering it to the people is a positive thing. But if you don't have this kind of understanding of it, then I don't know, why not skim a little bit off the top, right? You're acting as an individual. If you don't see this thing as a vehicle, for example, of empowerment of working people, the tendency, the human nature aspect of maybe saying like, what, I could maybe take some money from this, if I have the ability, right? If I'm in a certain position, and Fred Hampton gives examples about how radical left movements all across the globe have fallen into these crises, where they take power and then people start being corrupt. Um, so you have to build up that kind of revolutionary consciousness and understanding, not just to know who your enemies are and who your friends are, but also to understand the techniques and the tactics that are being put forward. That's called political education, and that is a fundamental aspect of party building. Um, so the party, like when we talk about the working class movement, we're talking about a pre-party moment in American history. We do not have that kind of institutional organization. There are groups and institutions that maybe would like to become that organization, but they're not there yet. And I'm not going to sit here and say which ones, um, I think could necessarily deliver us, because the proof is sort of in the pudding. What things are going to be able to bring in the membership? What organizations are going to be able to bring in the people? But understanding what it is that we're missing right now is that kind of party formation. Understanding what that party formation would be doing in a moment like this is something that's really important. So people are always like, "Oh, the left is this, or the left does that, or the left failed at this, or the left is unsuccessful at that." And it's like, yeah, it's true, right? Like, I think the left failed, for example, during the railroad strike. I think we should have been a lot stronger. We should have been able to drive that public conversation more. And certainly our elected representatives should not have voted to break the railroad strike. But without a party apparatus, I mean, we're just hoping that we can maybe coalesce some level of coordination between a large and disparate mass of people. I'm just talking about like the left, people who self-identify as leftists right now. You're not going to be able to do that if you don't have an institution or organization that is going to be doing that kind of that kind of coordination. We also don't have a place where we can have these debates, right? You know, all sorts of ideas that were like, oh, this is a left-wing idea. I mean, where's the debate held, right? It's held interpersonally amongst friends. Largely, it's held online. Some publications put out arguments. You should think about this in this way, or you should think about this in that way. A party would be the forum to be able to do that, so that we can debate these things. But once we decide on something, we all unite behind it. These are basic tenets of like successful socialist parties the globe over, and that's something that we're missing right now. And I'd like to keep going on this if people are interested in it. Yeah, CLR James, thanks, Strom, is who I was trying to quote a second ago. Um, I want to keep going on this, but instead of me just going off the top of my head, let's see if people have questions or points or anything that they want to add into this conversation. So, I can be speaking with y'all instead of to you. All right, I'm keeping my eye on the chat, so throw anything in there. I mean, also, Michael says, there have been ballot initiatives to add ranked choice voting at city and municipal levels, but that doesn't work in a primary. Technically, the political parties are private entities. Yeah, totally. I mean, the primary is one thing. Two, I think that like we should. I don't think that it's wrong to sort of push for some electoral reform, but I think that like you can have all sorts of electoral systems in like we could have a parliamentary system, which I think would be a better system than the one that we have right now in the U.S. Um, but there are countries that have parliamentary systems, and that doesn't deliver you where you need to be. Right? There's and I think it's because a lot of the left is like comes more out of like the progressive movement than the socialist movement. Um, you know, whatever the conditions of the electoral system are, um, like you could have like the greatest and most progressive electoral system, and that is in no way, shape, or form a kind of guarantee that like the governments that are going to be elected are going to be more pro working class or working class rooted than they are today, right? So I don't think that it's wrong to advocate for these things strategically where you can. But there's this kind of if we just fix the American electoral system, we would have a more radical government. Now, capital and capitalists are very capable of reorienting themselves to new rules of the game if that gets set up in that way. Okay. Well, I'm not DV, if you could reframe this. DV says, why do so many leftists in the US fail to understand the danger of commodification regarding public services? I mean, are you talking about like the privatization efforts, to sort of target public utilities, or are you talking about um, if you could reformulate that, would that help me out to answer that? Rob says this too. Yes, the official left parties in Western countries draw their candidates from a hopelessly narrow pool of people. They're trying not to select working people. You suspect. I mean, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, like, look, the Labor Party is a great example of something that used to on some level ostensibly be a working party, but has been completely captured. Um, but I mean, like, I was listening to a Leo Panish conversation on mandatory deselection in the Labor Party, and just to sort of catch people up, what that would mean is people who are Labor Party members who get put up for elections, deselecting those who are sort of out of line with the party. Right? Remember, the Labor Party was completely incapable was completely hostile to the Corbyn project, right? So the argument, I supported deselection because I think you should get those people out of the party because they're weakening the Labour Party. They weaken the Corbyn movement. And in fact, as we know now, there were members who were actively sabotaging the Labour Party to make sure that the Tories stayed in power and Jeremy Corbyn did not become the prime minister. But a point that Leo Panich makes about this that I think is an interesting and I think a good one is the idea that, like, if you just consistently shuffle around um, these kind of characters, you're going to get the same kinds of people. Because if you think, for example, um, people who get into these kind of positions and then start to betray some of the fundamental commitments of the organization or the party that they're in, you have to understand that problem structurally, right? Because the argument can't just be that, oh, these people sort of lost sight personally, right? Their heart wasn't in it, and they became corrupt or they started betraying their base. No, there's something structural within the Labor Party and structural within governing that probably amplifies those people in the party, certainly, but also will pull certain people in a more conservative bend. Let's call it that. So, how can you change that? Well, you have to be doing mass political education within the organization and the institution so that the membership, the people in the membership, are prepared to maybe be in a leadership position and then not to fall into the same traps that the people before them fell into. This is, I think, some of the most critical work that we have in front of us, and it's hard because it's such an advanced level of political strategy and political thinking, right? Because we're so far out of power, we rarely think about what it would be like if we were in power. But that work has to start right now, right? That, like, like real work, like what would a democratized financial system look like? What are the steps that would be necessary to be creating that? Like doing that kind of political education with membership right now so that everyone in the organization understands these things is really crucial so that when we do have momentum behind us and we're just going to have the ability to maybe enact some policies, we don't start tripping up over ourselves. This is very difficult work that takes a while to sort of, because think about it, you're enculturated under capitalism, and under the kind of current conditions to be able to deliver, to be a transitionary movement between this system and a more egalitarian one. There's going to be a lot of things that come up along the way, and you have to have that kind of social education within the organization so that we understand, because people say I'm a socialist, and a lot of times it's like, well, what does that mean? For most people, it means they have a commitment to working people over bosses, and they want working people to be empowered, and that is good. That is the start of it. But really thinking about what would a financial system look like under a different model, what would a labor system look like under a different model. Like, we have to be building up that capacity and understanding and investigating those questions ourselves, so that when we do have the ability, even if we're not in the majority, but we just have some ability to sort of deliver things on some level, on the political level, we can start laying the groundwork for building that. Okay, let's see. Nadia says, question, what do you think the odds of the right sweeping the elections in 2024 are? And from there, instituting theocratic fascism. Well, I'm a little bit less. I don't know. I don't think that theocratic fascism is around the door. But that doesn't mean that things can't get a hell of a lot worse right now. I mean, we're seeing concerted efforts, for example, by the right wing, to take away the right to vote and to have democracy, as they're doing in Texas right now, effectively barring local government with HB 2127. If you didn't watch our conversation with Alex Burnell, it's called Texas's Death Star Bill. It's up on our YouTube channel now, for people who want more info on that. But what do I think the chances of the right being able to do well in 24? I mean, I think they are a lot higher than they should be. I think Biden is like extremely weak right now, and I don't know why people are so confident and comfortable with him leading the party, particularly recognizing um, how little materially he's been able to deliver for people. Now you're going to get these dumbass posts from liberals over for the next 6 months. Oh my God, Joe Biden passed IRA. Oh my God, Joe Biden passed the American Rescue Plan. Well, like this long list of achievements, right? And they think that, oh, look, there's a checklist. That means he's done something. Well, think, practically as to what people's experiences have been the past 3 years. Most people are under the assumption that we're entering into a recession. This is anecdotal, but like, I know everybody around me is struggling a lot more financially than they were a few years back. Um, People are about to get hit over the head with student loan repayments. And you could say this is Biden's fault or not his fault, but that's the reality of what people's experiences are. They're not running on much more other than Trump's really bad again. And also Trump has the advantage of not having been in office long enough for people to forget what that experience was like. I think that they are a lot weaker than a lot of folks. Sorry, that, like, Joe Biden in particular is a lot weaker than a lot of people are acting like he is. What even is the progressive movement? I don't know. It's a tough one. It's pretty amorphous, isn't it? I mean, this is like the thing I'm trying to get us to sort of move into a more socialist movement direction, because progressives can be all different kinds of folks, right? I think a lot of people who are socialists would say that they're progressive. I also think a lot of people who just want nicer capitalism, consider themselves to be progressives. There was a moment where that distinction in the movement became really clear during Bernie versus Warren, for example. And I think time has sort of um, blurred those distinctions again in a way that I think is bad. All right, let's see. I mean, didn't Margaret Thatcher, Nadia says Blair basically made the Labour Party a Thatcherite party. I think that's true. Didn't Thatcher say, or is this something that people attributed to her later, that she said that, her greatest achievement was Tony Blair? Oh, our good friend Rob. No, I'm not familiar with this. Maybe we need to get a guest on to talk about this. Rob says, David, I don't know if you follow the Jamie Driscoll issue in UK Labour. Popular socialist mayor who's sitting has been deselected by Starmer on incredibly tendacious claims regarding anti-Semitism. I mean, the Labour Party is just a steaming pile of garbage at this point. Um, and it's tragic. It's sometimes hard to believe that Jeremy Corbyn, for example, was so close to becoming the prime minister, and the triumphant conversations that we were having about things like public finance. And I think it's very hard to endorse participating in politics within the Labour Party in the UK right now, as we've talked about with a lot of our comrades in the UK on this program. It's the party of Starmer, and then really nasty pretenders like Paul Mason. And I totally agree. And if anything with this project, it could get people to start reading certain folks like Leo Panich. That would be a good thing. I think if and if people haven't read, this is a book I suggest like every month on the Griscom stream. I'll pull it up and put it in the chat. Um, um, the Socialist Challenge Today. I'll put this. Sorry, I might just take the first one, so I might don't have to buy it from Amazon. Just use something else if you prefer. That was just the first one. This is a great book. If you haven't read it, The Social Challenge Today. I've done some videos on it actually. Um, I either here or on TMBS. It's short, 100 pages or so. Goes through movements that you're very familiar with: Corbyn, Sanders, and Syriza in Greece. Hopefully, we're going to be able to have the authors of the populist moment on the program soon. It is a new book that's coming out from Verso. Um, Anton Yeager and Daniel Zamora, I believe, right? I got an early copy of it, and I've been reading through it. It is Arthur Borrello and Anton Yeager wrote it. Excuse me. Really, really phenomenal book, and it's coming out soon. I'll put that in. It's not coming out until September, so we'll probably do something on it as we get closer. But I've been really enjoying reading that as well. But yeah, read Leo Panich if you haven't. Okay, let's see. I mean, I think there's a very Matt and I have been joking about this, but I think there is a very real possibility that we do 2020 for the next 12 years. And what I mean by that is like Trump or some kind of Trump avatar, similar kind of figure versus decrepit neoliberalism. Yeah, I think this is why even with like going back to like the Trump legal case. I was talking to some of my lawyer friends, and we were both really the case against Trump is just like it's unbelievable how much of a hole he's dug himself into. I'm not going to talk about the legal case. It's just not my level of expertise. I want to talk politically about what this means. Um, there's been this kind of fixation with Trump from the get-go that you're going to be able to beat that movement outside of politics, and I don't think that's possible because I think that there are plenty of there are movements and people who will be very capable of picking up the Trump movement and running the same kind of threats to working people as Trump. This idea that you're going to be able to put this thing to bed via anything other than politics is wrong, and effectively the Democratic Party strategy right now is to hold up the barbarism of Trump and the Trump movement as like the threat, to working people, and like that doesn't put it away. That just maybe one election it works, maybe one it doesn't. that means it's a kind of continuous cycle of this kind of barbarism. And yeah, I think that, there's a very high chance of 24, 28, 32 being the same kind of election if we don't build something else. I mean, Nadia with the bangers, that communism is a much better idea than progressivism. I agree with you. Daniel has a question about NGOs. Change of gears here, David. How much do you know about NGOs, and can you break down what their limitations are, but also how a smart left should think about them? Well, I think that versus me giving you a couple minute answer, you should watch, if you haven't, the conversation that we had on the show on called NGOism, and I'll put that in the chat. Um, um, because no, I mean NGOs are an issue. 100% NGOs, um, what it does for left politics has not been something that has sort of brought us into, I mean, look, it's a professionalization of struggle, right? So you take things from the masses and you put them to the hands of the professional class. Sorry, I can't search at the same time as doing as talking to y'all. The interview is with Ben Fong and Melissa Nashek. We did, it's like an hour. It's really good. We go into this history where the NGO sort of came about, but like the fundamental, like the quick answer to this is like no. What do NGOs do? They take politics away from mass politics, and they professionalize them, right? Into a group of people who have interests, for example, in maintaining the status quo, interested, like maybe advocating and winning some victories, right? It's not that they're all sort of cynical actors, but that there's just a fundamental um, there's a fundamental difference between, for example, a mass movement for something and somebody whose sort of professional career is built up around NGOs. And look, and I'm sure people who listen to this show, might work at an NGO. I've worked at NGOs in the past. It's not saying that you're like evil or wicked, but no, as a political strategy for the left, this is something that developed in the 70s. In particular, and it's only grown since then. Taking away politics from the people and sort of putting into the hands of the experts and the technocrats and the people who understand these things hasn't been something that has built up the strong base that we need. The biggest problem with NGOs, as I think even the people who work at NGOs in the audience will know, is well, what do you need to have a successful NGO? You can maybe run a dues based membership thing, but the vast majority of NGOs get their money by appealing to the wealthy. And that's going to very much influence the kind of politics and solutions that you advocate for. So this kind of retreat into the NGO of the left that we saw after the kind of defeats of the mass movements in the 60s, hasn't been good for building up a strong workers' movement or left movement in this country. How do I bypass the Jackman slush pile? I don't know what you mean, Strom. Um, all right, let me make sure I'm not missing any more questions. I might run. What's up, John? Nice to hear from you. Jason says, who's going to carry the torch in Texas since Beto doesn't have it anymore? Could it be Kassar or Crockett? I, w- I think Crockett can be fine on some things. I wouldn't say that we should be lining our movement up behind Crockett. I think Kassar, if he wanted to run for governor, I mean, that would be an easy yes for me. But I don't. I think that he's much more interested in this feeling that he can do much more good in the Congress, and um, having him saying things he's been saying about Cuba, for example, is very helpful. I think that his introduction into the squad has been beneficial so far. So I don't know if I would disagree with him on that he can do a lot of good in Congress right now. But we'll see. Look, I mean, I think rather than hoping that we can get some kind of figure to sort of put a shot in the arm of the left, I mean, I think really like what we need to be doing is building up these mass labor movements so we can start producing our own candidates and people from our movements. I think that hoping that another a Beto figure or someone akin to him. I mean, the big one, if you want to hear my like kind of more wonky guy take, who's from somebody who follows a lot of Texas politics, I think one of the Castro brothers probably has a pretty decent shot, but they've been pretty adamant that they're not thinking about running. for governor or senate, but maybe that will change in the next few years. Congressional baseball fan says, "What are your top hair care tips for all the long-haired, freaky people in the chat?" I just put my hair up in a bun most days, so I don't know. Wash it, use conditioner. I mean, Strom, generally the when you send an email to the editors at Jacobin, it sends an email to all of them. So it will reach them. They usually get a lot of submissions though, sort of the tension. Thanks very much, narrative dude, for the super chat. Hippo character flips around and does a V sign with his hand while the word victory appears in the background. Very beautiful, very beautiful. Well, folks, this weekend we're going to have a episode jumping into the commodification of nostalgia, talking about comic books, Disney, Star Wars, all that kind of stuff. Really, really fun conversation that'll be up on Sunday for patrons. Patreon.com/left reckoning to support the show. Please, if you do like the program and all the things that we've been doing, do consider supporting us. You know, it's $5 a month. You get 3-to-1 content. You get the post game, and you get the bonus episodes. So you're really getting 2 extra shows a week on top of the main show and the Griscom stream. So definitely consider supporting us. It really would help us, continue to expand because we want to be able to cover more. We might, we've been talking about maybe being able to do something on Sunday on the public side, but I don't think we're going to be able to do anything like that until we can expand the team. Matt and I really want to be able to bring um, somebody else on to help us with the production and the research and things like that, but we won't be able to do that until we hit some of these next level milestones. So if you like the program, if you've been watching it for the past couple of years and you haven't supported us, maybe consider doing it now because it really helps us out. And I think that Left Reckoning has much more that we should and could be doing. We'll be back on Tuesday with the main show, everyone. Have a good weekend. Take care of yourself. Appreciate you all, and feel free to reach out with any questions or ideas or things that you have in your head. Yeah, take care, friends. See you soon.